But then that second wish came true, actually not that long ago. And forgive me if I sound like I'm bragging here, but I can't help myself. A teacher told me she had assigned it to her students in northern Alabama, a really sort of hard luck school. And one of her students said it was the first book that he had read cover to cover. And he doesn't normally like to read, but this particular book, he got something out of it. She asked him, she said, "What is it you like about that book?" He thought for a moment, he said, "This here is a fine white trash story." And the teacher added very quickly, she said, "He meant that as a compliment." But I took it as a compliment. In fact, it's probably the best compliment I've ever received. Because if some kid who considers himself to be white trash reads it and says, "Hey, she's not that different from me." And if some popular cheerleader reads it and says, "Hey, she's not that different from me," then to me that's what reading and education and writing is all supposed to be about. It's about exposure to things that we don't know, and it helps us understand how much we're all alike. Just the other day, about a week ago, I got another compliment that ranks way up there with a white trash compliment, which I was at a reading in Charlottesville, Virginia. I live in Virginia now. And an African-American woman came up to me, a really lovely woman, and she said, "I want to thank you for writing this book, because until I read it, I don't believe black families acted like this." And the reason I love that so much is because it again drives home to me that sometimes, we think that things happen to us because of our circumstance or because of our situation, because of who we are. When what this book, having written this book, has taught me, and speaking with readers such as yourself, is that we all have something. That we all have something in our past, and sometimes we think that that makes us weird or different, but we're all so much alike. Sometimes our circumstances are different, the place in the world we live are different, our culture is different, but beneath the skin, we're all different, and it's really unfair to assume that you know what's going on with somebody else because of how they look or because of their circumstances. When I sat down to write, to tell the truth, as my mother challenged me to do, first I had to sort of figure out what the truth is, My book is nonfiction, but you have to figure out, well, what is true? My very, very favorite memory from childhood is when I was 5 years old and we had no money for Christmas presents. My father took each of his children out into the desert night. We lived in Arizona. It was nighttime. He took us out, and he let us look up into the desert sky and choose whatever star we wanted for a Christmas present. I chose the brightest one. It was Venus, and Dad had to explain to me that it wasn't a star at all. It was just a planet. And the reason it was so bright is it was so much closer. I wanted it anyway. Dad said, "What the heck, it's Christmas. You want a planet, you got a planet." And that night he gave me Venus. And to this day, whenever I look up in the sky, I think, I own that. It's my most treasured memory. When my father died, I told that story at his funeral. And my sister Lori, who's 3 years older than me and always has been so much smarter than me and always saw right through my father's BS, as soon as I told the story, she said, "Isn't that like that sorry SOB dad of ours to give away something that doesn't belong to him in the first place?" And the thing is, she's right. She's absolutely right. It was a completely meaningless gesture. But I'm right too. It was a priceless treasure. It is whatever you choose to make of it. And I believe that the same can be said for the glass castle itself. The glass castle, for those of you who haven't read the book, when I was growing up, we lived everywhere. We lived in cars, we lived in abandoned depots, I slept in a cardboard box, we lived all over the place. But Dad said that that was only temporary. You see, my father was going to find gold, and with that gold, he was going to build us a great big mansion out of the desert that was going to be run by solar energy. He called it the Glass Castle. And when things got really tough, he'd pull out the blueprints for the Glass Castle and let us work on our house. And, needless to say, the Glass Castle didn't exactly get built. Alcoholism and a few other things got in the way. But I sort of think that maybe something much more important, that the Glass Castle meant something much more important than the physical structure itself, which was the dream and the hope for the future. Many people have come up to me and said, was the Glass Castle just a ridiculous, false promise, or was it a wonderful gift? And it is whatever you choose to make of it, as is so much in life. So many people who read my book have said, it's interesting for me because they debate about my parents, whether or not my mother and father were good parents. And some people have actually gone to sort of nasty fights. It's very interesting to me. Some people think that my parents were scoundrels and should have been locked up because they didn't do anything good for me. Other people think that they gave me great gifts. I choose to focus on the latter. And again, I think it's a decision that you make, whether you choose to focus on the good or the bad. Before I came out of the closet, I think that those of us who've been through tough times are actually at a huge advantage in many ways. I really do. I think that we have many blessings. I think that all hardships are blessings in disguise, that there's a very valuable lesson wrapped up in every difficult situation. Before I came out of the closet about my own past, a very well-to-do friend of mine, she wanted me to go with her to an Outward Bound expedition. And I don't know if y'all ever heard of Outward Bound. I hadn't. But she was like, what is this Outward Bound thing? She's telling me, it's this wonderful program where you go out into the wilderness and you forage for food and you learn to build fires. And I'm thinking, I don't want to say anything, but I'm thinking, honey, the first 17 years of my life were in Outward Bound. So I called up my brother and I said, hey, Brian, you're not going to believe this. Rich people got to pay for their hardships. We thought that was just about the funniest thing we'd ever heard. We had a big hoot over that. But I have to tell you, the more I thought about it, the more it actually made sense to me. Because this woman who grew up in the lap of luxury, great privilege,